Welcome to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reika and I am your host. Excuse me. So today I'm bringing you a solo episode. It's not an interview with a fellow full-time yoga teachers, but a solo episode of me talking about yoga teacher training. Since I've been asking so many of my fellow yoga teachers about their teacher training experience, I thought I would make an episode to share about my yoga teacher training experience. So I completed my 200-hour teacher training with YogaWorks in LA. I chose to do a 1-month intensive teacher training, my first 200 hours, because I used to work for a travel touring company, and it was a seasonal job. So I would work about half of the year, maybe 6 months, 7 months out of the year. I'll have a couple months off. I'll do another season, a couple months off. So during the couple months off, during my off season, I decided to pursue my dream and do a teacher training. And for me, 1 month intensive worked out perfectly since I didn't have more than a few months to spend on teacher training. So I did a 1 month intensive at YogaWorks in Santa Monica. I applied for a scholarship, so I got 50% off on my teacher training. So I think with 50% off, I paid about $1,500. I'm not exactly sure if that's a correct number, but I think it was about that price. And in exchange of getting half off on my tuition, my job was to not grade homework, but keep track of who is turning in what homework, keep track of attendance, who's late and who's coming, as well as arriving early to unlock the door for the teacher training room. After training is done, I would stay a little longer to clean up, make sure the props are put away properly, sweep the room, and lock the door at the end of the day. So those were kind of my role as a work trade person who got a discount on a teacher training. And I always tell people to always ask for a discount, ask for a scholarship, grant, work trade opportunity if finance is a barrier for you to do a training. I think always ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. The worst they can say is no, and then it's great if they can offer you some kind of discount or even trade opportunities. So mine was 1 month intensive. We met Monday through Friday, and it was from morning till evening. Maybe it was like 8 to 5. I don't remember exactly. And it was a total of 4 weeks. We had a weekend off. So the way I was able to pay for my teacher training is because of my touring job. When I worked for, a season for my touring job, I was always traveling and I didn't have to pay rent because the touring company provided places to stay, stipends for food, as well as all the travel expenses was paid for. So all the money I made, I got to save. So I used that money to pay for my teacher training. My goal was to start teaching as a yoga teacher right after my teacher training. And if I could make a living as a teacher, yoga teacher, then I would continue to become a teacher, continue on as a teacher path if I liked it. And if I couldn't make enough money to live with my teaching career, then I would go back to my traveling job for the next season. So that was kind of my safety blanket that I knew I could always go back to my traveling job. So the lead teacher's name was Malachi Greaves. She was a longtime teacher at YogaWorks. I really enjoyed her teaching. I did not know her before I took this teacher training. I actually did not know much about YogaWorks before I took this training. I was just doing a lot of research on teacher training program in LA. YogaWorks came up. They looked like they had their teacher training pretty well established, had some great reviews, and they offered me a scholarship when I applied. So that's kind of the reason why I chose YogaWorks. And I'm actually happy with it. I'm happy with the training that I got. During this 1 month, I stayed at my friend's house in Inglewood. My friend from college and his mom lived in Inglewood, and they had an extra tiny room that they let me stay for 4 weeks because it was a little bit closer for me to commute to Santa Monica on public transportation from Inglewood than traveling from Long Beach. So I think I paid him $200 or $300 for the month to let me stay at him and his mom's place. They were so kind and generous to let me stay. And I would catch a bus and metro and another bus, I think, to get to Santa Monica every morning. And to get back from Santa Monica, I'll do the same. It took me, I think, like hour 45 to 2 hours each way to get to and from the place I was staying to teacher training. And I didn't mind at all because I was really loving teacher training. I was very grateful for the experience, but I did notice that that wasn't the case for most people in my teacher training. I think I was the only one who was catching public transportation there and back to teacher training. I packed my lunch every day. So on the weekend, I would do a grocery haul and make kind of like easy to pack lunch that I could eat, same thing for the whole week. So I can save money. So I didn't have to eat out every time I was in Santa Monica. It can get real expensive. So I packed my own lunch every single day. Actually breakfast, lunch, and snacks because the food I bring has to last me until the evening time when I get home. I think my teacher training had about 25 to 30 people. I can't remember, but I think it was about that number. And I did not make like a long-lasting friendship from that teacher training. I still follow maybe a few people on Instagram. We might say hi here and there, but I didn't make like a best friend from that teacher training. And I'm not sure if anybody became a full-time teacher from that teacher training. And I'm not even sure if anybody from that training are still teaching. Maybe they are, but I'm just not sure because I didn't get close to a lot of them. I started applying for a teaching job before this teacher training even finished because I knew I wanted to start working as a teacher. So as soon as I finished my teacher training, I could start working. So I remember starting to apply in Long Beach area even before my teacher training ended. And I can see that I was a little bit more ambitious than a lot of people in the teacher training. A lot of people in the group were not sure if they wanted to teach, which is completely fine. And I think that's quite common. But for me, I was like, this is going to be my income. When I graduate from this teacher training, I had to make money as a teacher, yoga teacher. So I kind of went straight on. And I don't regret that because it kind of, forced me to put myself out there and start applying for a job right away. So I can start teaching right away before, if I would have waited, I think I would have kind of lost the momentum or I would have started forgetting what I learned in teacher training. So I'm actually happy that I started teaching right away and really pushed myself and put myself out there. I also noticed that in this teacher training, some people knew that they did not want to teach. They just wanted to take this training to deepen their yoga knowledge and their practice. So they weren't very serious or they weren't very appreciative of the practice teaching portion of the training because they weren't planning to become a teacher anyway. But for somebody like me who I knew I wanted to become a yoga teacher, that practice teaching was crucial. That was a very important part of the training. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic of some people not wanting to do practice teaching because they didn't care to teach. And some people who really needed the practice teaching because they really wanted to start teaching right away. So I thought there was a little disconnect. Maybe there should be another training for somebody who want to deepen their practice. And then maybe another training for somebody who really wanted to become a teacher. I thought that would be cool to have 2 different trainings. So that was my first 200-hour teacher training experience. I think the pros of this teacher training at YogaWorks, I think it gave me a great foundation. They had amazing manuals. I think I had like 5 or 6 thick manuals that came with this teacher training that is full of information that I still go back and read sometime to get information from. YogaWorks has been teaching teacher training for quite some time, and I think they have slowly perfected their manuals and their, format and all of that. So I think it was really well run and organized. I remember there was anatomy almost every day and also yoga philosophy every single day of the training. So I actually really enjoy that because some of the yoga teacher training I have been part of only had anatomy for like one weekend out of the whole 3 or 4 month of the teacher training. Or yoga philosophy was only covered 1 day or 2 days, or half day out of the whole teacher training. So I thought this 200 was comprehensive in a way that we covered anatomy and also philosophy almost every single day of the training. And I really loved the manuals that they gave us in terms of I still have them. I still go back and look at them. Very, very helpful tools. I think the cons of this teacher training, now that looking back to it, there's definitely lack of diversity in students as well as teachers, and lack of discussions around diversity, cultural appropriation. There weren't a lot of training or discussions around accessibility, how to make yoga more accessible, how to teach yoga that is more accessible to people who are not yoga practitioner already. And there weren't a lot of business side of yoga lecture or training around it. I remember finishing this training, not really know how to apply for a yoga job, not really know how to make a resume, how do I dress for my first audition, those kind of things I didn't know anything about. So I think that would be the cons of this teacher training. Now I want to talk about my 300-hour teacher training, my first 300. I think the cost was about, I don't remember, but I think it was $2,000 to $3,000. This time I applied for a scholarship, but I didn't get it since I got it the first time. So I chose to do a 300-hour teacher training with Yoga Works again because I really appreciated my first teacher training and I thought it was really comprehensive. And there was a lot of amazing, pretty well-known senior teachers who worked at Yoga Works. And at the time, I really kind of idealized working for Yoga Works. I wanted to work for Yoga Works. So I waited about a year of teaching full time before I decided to do 300-hour teacher training. Because I kind of, put myself head first and started teaching right away, I accumulated quite a bit of teaching hours before I got to my 300 after that first year. I also lived very cheaply or simply, let's say. I lived very simply. I didn't own a car. I still don't own a car. I bicycled to all the yoga job locations in Long Beach. I rented a tiny room in apartment, 3-bedroom apartment that I shared with 3 or 4 other ladies. I just kept my living expenses really, really cheap this first year of teaching so that I can survive as a full-time yoga teacher. And at the end of the year, I remember doing calculation because I keep track of, how much I work, how much I make, how much I spend. I remember doing my calculation and realized that I saved just about the same amount of money, or maybe a little bit more, of what this 300-hour teacher training was going to cost. So I felt good. I'm like, okay, I worked hard. I saved this much money from last year of teaching. Now I can use all my savings, not all of it, but the savings I made from teaching into this 300, and I felt good about it because I wasn't going into my other savings. I got to just use what I made in the last year from my yoga teaching career. So I decided to sign up for it. And this is how the teacher training format works. So we met every other weekend, sometime 2 weekends in a row for a weekend workshop module that happened in LA, Larchmont, LA. And that had a cohort of about, I would say, 25 to 30 people as well. And we would meet with the same group every weekend module we had. And we got to choose one teacher who were going to be our mentor. And I think they had a selection of maybe 10 teachers that we get to choose from. And they were all teachers for Yoga Works. So I chose David Lynch. And with our mentor, we had to take mentor's yoga class once a week and assist our mentors class once a week, at least. And it was a span of about 6 to 8 months. I don't remember if it was 6 months or 8 months, but it was around there. So we had, a long period of time that we got to be together with the same cohort, the same mentor. I got to take my mentor's class often, every week, assisted his class every week. And we also had a philosophy discussion and class that we met in the midweek. I think it was a Wednesday night in Santa Monica. For the first half of this training, we met maybe almost every Wednesday. It could have been every other Wednesday. And we also had some practice teaching sessions that we would meet in the evening in Santa Monica. We would also have mentorship meetings. So we would meet with our mentor. So that was a smaller group. It was a group of like 3 or 4 for me that we all had the same mentor, David Lynch, that we would meet. We also had a final project we had to do. It could have been anything. I don't remember the guideline, but I made a 7-week course that I didn't teach yet, but I kind of created and did all the work for planning the 7-week course. That was my final project. And again, I would catch metro and buses to get to Santa Monica, to get to Pasadena, to get to Larchmont, to assist, take classes, take workshop and philosophy discussions and stuff like that. It would take me a long time, but almost 2 hours or maybe even over 2 hours one way to get to a certain location because it was quite a far away from Long Beach. I decided to teach full time while I take this training for the 6 to 8 months. Just sub out the classes when necessary, especially when there was a weekend workshop. I had to sub out my weekend classes. But actually, I was able to do it. I was actually able to teach full-time schedule, still earn money as I went through this quite busy teacher training 6 to 8 months. I do remember philosophy classes in the evening was quite late in Santa Monica, and it would take a really long time to get to Santa Monica from Long Beach with Metro. So we would get out almost close to 9 p.m. And that means I wouldn't get home to Long Beach until like 11 p.m. So I remember a couple times I would just get really, really cheap Airbnb in LA and stay there a night. And it was usually Airbnb that was just renting a bed or bunk beds, with a house full of other people renting bunk beds. And I would just get there late after the philosophy class. So like I would arrive probably like 10 p.m. to this Airbnb with full of people who's renting bunk beds for like $20-$30 a night. And I would get up super early the next day, go take my mentor's class, assist my mentor's class, and then ride Metro back to Long Beach. So that was quite a lot. But, I loved training. I felt very strongly about doing this 300 hour. I was very committed. I would say I was very committed. And at that time, I was just like super focused on completing this 300 hours. And sometime I would meet people who I can carpool with from Long Beach or somewhere nearby. So I did carpool with some people along the way too. So I'm very, very grateful of that. So every weekend or every other weekend, the workshop had different topics with different teachers. Sometimes it was focused on anatomy. Sometimes it was focused on restorative. Sometimes the focus was on teaching beginners. Sometimes focus was on vinyasa sequencing. So different teachers would bring their expertise and teach the weekend workshop, which I thought was really cool because we got exposure to different senior teachers at Yoga Works, got to like learn their teaching style and, get to learn from different teachers. So I thought that was really cool. Another thing I noticed was that some people came straight out of 200 and took 300 hours. So they did not have any teaching experience. They just kind of came straight from 200 to 300. And there are some people who's been teaching for a couple of years or even decades, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years to this 300-hour program. So there was a different variety and levels of teachers, who's some people teaching for a long time, some people who haven't really taught yet because they came straight from 200. So another thing I realized in this teacher training was that what these people needed or wanted or had expectation from this teacher trainings were different. Somebody who's been teaching for 10 years, they came to kind of fine tune their teaching, or they came to learn even more so they can become a better teacher. And then some people who came just straight out of 200, they didn't have a teaching experience yet, or if they did, it was very, very little. So what they needed was more practice. And I think somebody who just came out of 200, they don't really have the experience of being out in the field yet. So they don't really know what they're looking for yet either, what they need most assistance with, or what kind of teaching knowledge they're seeking for. So, I thought that was interesting and different as well. So I think it'll be cool if there was a training, maybe 2 different trainings for people who just have, no teaching experience, and then people who have more teaching experience, or maybe have a requirement that you have to be teaching this many hours before you apply for 300-hour teacher training. I think that would be cool. Same thing with 200-hour teacher training. I think it'll be cool to have application process where you have to be practicing for this amount of time, or you should have, this much practice experience before you apply for teacher training. Because even in 200-hour teacher training, now that I'm noticing that I have assisted quite a few teacher training, I've been part of some of the teacher training. People come who are brand new to yoga, and some people come who's been practicing yoga for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And, what they need from these teacher training could be quite completely different. So those are the things that I've noticed in my 200 and 300 hours. All right. For my 300 hours, the pros were that it was long. I like that it was long. I got to build a relationship with my classmates or my cohort, other teachers. I got to learn from different yoga teachers. I was learning and also applying what I learned in my teaching, since I was teaching full time as I was taking this 300-hour teacher training. I thought it was very comprehensive. I love the fact that it had mentorship. I had one teacher that I was taking his class regularly, assisting his class, and this person can give me more personalized feedback about my teaching and, about yoga in general. I love the assisting part. I think it's so cool that I got to assist my mentor and had the experience of assisting. I don't see that so much in teaching world here in Long Beach, of teacher assisting their teachers in their classes to kind of learn from their teachers as they assist. So I really enjoyed that. I got the experience of assisting. I also loved that I got exposure to many different senior teachers and their styles, their philosophy about teaching. And I think it was a great networking opportunity if I wanted to build a career at YogaWorks in the future, getting to know other teachers, networking with other students, and learning how business side of YogaWorks works. So that was pros. Cons, looking back, I think having maybe different teachers for every weekend workshop, sometimes there weren't a lot of cohesiveness to that, although that's also pros too. So there's pros and cons of the same thing. Also, it was quite far away from me, so that was challenging at some point. It was a big commitment for me, especially because I didn't have a car. There weren't too many practice teaching sessions that I could count in one hand how many practice teaching sessions there were. But although the one we did have was helpful because we got feedback from our mentors. And again, I don't think there was a lot of diversity in teaching staff or students at YogaWorks. And there weren't a lot of discussions around cultural appropriation or diversity in the yoga world. And again, there wasn't a lot of discussions or teachings around technique on teaching accessible yoga, making yoga accessible, not only as a physical practice, but also financial accessibility, entry to barriers for a lot of people who want to practice yoga, but who can't. So those are cons that I can think of. I also went on to do my second 300 hour. That was a few years later during the pandemic. I was taking a lot of Annie Carpenter's continuing education modules and realized that I'm already halfway with her 300-hour teacher training, so I might as well finish it. So how her teacher training works is that her method of teaching is called Smart Flow method. She will teach, she have many different modules she teach, and each modules can be like 50 hours or 25, 75, 100 hours or 150 hours. So you get to choose, you can take different modules to accumulate total of 300 hours to get her 300-hour certificate as a Smart Flow teacher. I think the pros of that is you get to kind of pick and choose which one you want to take. I think there was few that was required for everybody to take that certain training, but other than that, you get to kind of pick and choose which module you wanted to take. This can be pros and cons, is that most of the training I took with Annie at the time was online because it was during the pandemic. I guess con of that is that, you know, you're not there in person for her to see your practice, for her to be able to really give helpful feedback. Although she gives amazing feedback through Zoom, it's probably not the same as if she saw me practice in person. Same thing with, you know, developing relationship and all of that. I think in person is just priceless, and there's no replacement to in-person practice and learning. But cons, actually pros of doing my teacher training mostly online for my second 300 is that it made it accessible. I would not have been able to complete Annie Carpenter's 300 hours if it wasn't for everything switching to online. Maybe I would have finished many, many years later. But for me to actually really being able to practice with Annie regularly and take her classes regularly, take her trainings, all of that was possible because everything became online, and she lives in Oakland. I live in LA. It just made it a lot more accessible for me to learn from her and take her classes. So that's definitely pros. And what I enjoyed about taking Annie's 300-hour teacher training much later in my teaching career, it wasn't, you know, right after my 200, and it wasn't, you know, it was quite some years in, was that I was already established in my teaching. Obviously, I'm always evolving and I'm always changing. I'm hopefully always growing as a teacher. But at that time, I already had a pretty solid teaching voice and style. So I knew what I wanted to pursue. And when I started learning from Annie, I just knew that this was a teacher I want to learn more from. This was a teaching method I really want to learn more about. So I think when you're a brand new teacher, you just don't really know what teacher to follow, which teaching style and method resonate with you, because you just don't have that experience so much yet. You're still just kind of like figuring out in this yoga world. But at that point, when I finally really started to study deeply with Annie, I just knew that this was a teacher. This was a person I want to continue learning from. The really strong sense of, yes, like this is a training that I'm doing it, and I feel really good about doing it. So I really enjoyed Annie's 300-hour teacher training for that reason. Those are my teacher training experience. I do have, I'm almost complete with another 300-hour with a school called School of Yoga, and School of Yoga is created by Joan Hyman. She's an amazing, amazing teacher who also I met at YogaWorks. She has her own teacher training program, 200 and 300. She does a lot of retreats all over the world. I went to study with her in India. So I'm actually, only a few hours away from completing her 300 hours. But at this point, I don't know if I need another 300-hour certificate. Maybe I will complete it someday. But for now, I feel pretty content about where I'm at with my teaching certificate. But her training is also great as well. I really enjoyed her teaching. Okay, so those are my 200 and 300-hour teacher training experience. So now I'm going to share my opinion. So this is my opinion, and it may be different than yours. And that is totally okay. I would love to hear your opinion. If you are welcome to message me, write me to tell me what you think about how and what I think about teacher training. So I want to kind of give a list of what I think would be a great teacher training program. If I could create my own, or if I could go back in time and take another 200-hour teacher training, these are the things I think I want to look for. Or if I ever create my own, these are the things I want to be mindful about and also maybe include in my teacher training program because I think it's so important. So just know this is what I think for now. And, my thoughts, belief is always changing. So this could change in the future, as well as you are welcome to disagree with mine. So first, I think covering pretty good foundation of asana is important, especially if you are wanting to become a yoga teacher and want to teach yoga asana. I know yoga is more than asana. So asana is a movement, physical movement part of the practice. So there's so much to yoga. There's philosophy, there's history, there's meditation, there's pranayama. There's so much depth to it. But if you are wanting to become yoga teacher who teach asana, I think it's so important to have a great foundation on asana. So going over anatomies and different poses, alignments, biomechanics, these things I think is so important, and spending enough time to cover this foundation. That kind of brings me to the next point of having, I think I just said that, but having enough yoga anatomy trainings, hours of learning anatomy in the yoga teacher training, 200 hours is important. One weekend is not enough. Half a day is not enough. I think this should be something that's incorporated into almost every day of the training. Next is yoga history. Make sure you are involving yoga history. So we know the roots, where it comes from, and we can respect and honor the roots where it comes from. And I want to also touch on philosophy. I think it's so important that there's enough philosophy in yoga teacher training beyond just yamas and niyamas. Yamas and niyamas are great, but that's just a tiny portion of yoga philosophy that I wish there was quite a nice depth discussions around yoga philosophy beyond just yamas and niyamas. And I think it's also important to teach yoga philosophy in a way that is respectful to the roots, the culture and history where it comes from, but also in a way that can be inclusive to all spirituality, not singling out other spirituality, because I feel like anyone can practice yoga and get something out of yoga philosophy, whether you are atheist, Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, doesn't matter. I think there's something that we could all learn from in yoga philosophy. And I think that is important to be highlighted in teacher training. You don't have to be part of a certain religious group to be able to practice or learn yoga philosophy. And I think yoga philosophy should be taught in a non-dogmatic way, not in a way that this is the right way, this is the only yogic path that you must follow. I disagree with that. I think there's many different paths that you could follow in yoga path. And when teachers teach in a way that is dogmatic, this is the way, this is the only way, otherwise you're doing it wrong. Those kind of thinking and teachings, I think it can be very harmful. I think it's important to have diverse teaching staff or guest teachers from different backgrounds. It can get tricky when you bring in a lot of different teachers, and if they have a completely, different belief system or a different way they teach a pose, or, I can see that it can be confusing to students if you have multiple teachers who have a very different philosophy about how to teach yoga, how to teach asana, how to teach philosophy, or all of that. And I can see that can be confusing to students. But I think it's also important to honor and celebrate different perspectives that different teacher brings in. And it's so important to look around in a room when you're in a teacher training or any training or continuing education or any classroom setting and see who's here, who's in the room, whose voices are being heard and whose voices are not being heard or whose voices are not being represented here. I think that's important to look around and see. Ideally, it'll be great to have a diverse teaching staff and students from different backgrounds, different cultural background, racial background, ethnic background, financial background. I think that will make a learning environment very rich. And for me, what's another point that is important is there should be a portion of teacher training where we learn how to teach accessible yoga. Many 200-hour teacher training, we learn to teach each other. It's at a yoga studio setting where most students who come to studios are yoga practitioners already. They know how to do down dog. They know how to do chaturanga. They know how to do warrior two. So when you teach to only people who know what they're doing, you only teach to people who are able-bodied and who have a very similar type of body types. When you finish teacher training and get out into the real world and start teaching, you realize that, wow, not everybody know what down dog is or can do down dog. Not everybody can step forward from down dog. Not everybody know what warrior two is. And I think it's so important to learn how to teach yoga in an accessible way. I had to learn this the hard way. I actually continued on to do different other continuing education to be able to teach accessible yoga. And I think this is something that is so helpful if it was taught in 200 hours. This can be a day of training, a half a day, or even a weekend. It doesn't have to take that much time out of the teacher training. I mean, it would be great if it was. But section on how to teach accessible yoga, I think it's so important because most likely you're going to go out in the world, unless you only teach at yoga studios, you're going to go out in the world where you teach at gyms or community center, YMCA, where you are going to teach students with bodies that's going to be very, very different than the bodies you taught during the teacher training or the typical bodies you see in a yoga studio setting. So that is something I feel quite strongly about. I have taught accessible yoga modules for different yoga teacher training in the past, and that's something I love doing. And I think it's just so helpful other new teachers to graduate from teacher training, knowing they feel comfortable they can teach to a group who might not be able to stand up from a chair, or knowing that you can teach different variations of the poses if somebody can't step forward or do down dog. Another part I think that's important to think about before signing up for teacher training is, what is this teacher training's thoughts or belief system on religion and spirituality in regards to yoga? And how much and what of that is incorporated into yoga teacher training? I think transparency is important. So knowing that, is your teacher training part of a religious organization? Are they going to bring in certain religious practices into this teacher training? Are they going to make it part of a requirement to attend certain religious practice or events? I think that's important to know from the get-go as a student signing up for teacher training. Transparency. And if that's what students are seeking for, which a lot of people are seeking for that, then I think that's great. And then there are people who are not seeking for that, or maybe they have different faith that they belong to and they feel uncomfortable about that. So I think that's something that needs to be transparent from the beginning. So it's easy for students to, both students and teacher training to have to set an expectation from the beginning. I think it's also important for teacher training to involve a discussion around cultural appropriation in yoga in the West. Not to say I have answers to all of this very, very intricate, deep, many, many layered questions. I don't have answers to that, but I think it's important that we talk about it. We discuss about it so that we are aware. We're not coming in blindfolded into the yoga world. I think these are important topics to talk about. Same thing with social justice in yoga. Very important topic to even have a discussion around. And they're amazing teachers who are teaching this topic and leading and facilitating these discussions in the yoga world. And I think it's important for 200 hours to at least have a conversation around it. Also, trainings around trauma-informed, being trauma-informed teacher in a yoga setting, I think can be important. There are amazing in-depth trauma-informed trainings out there, and then you don't have to cover, in-depth training about trauma-informed, but I think it's, again, important to touch this subject or have discussions around it. So at least teachers coming out of 200 hours are informed and they can choose to continue their further education on trauma-informed or social justice in yoga or cultural appropriation in yoga. If they choose to study and go beyond this 200-hour offering resources, so they can. Also, I think it's important for teacher training to offer some kind of scholarships, work trade, payment plan, grants, partial scholarship to make teacher training financially accessible, I think is also another important part of teacher training. I know that, a lot of teachers deserve to get paid. We do work really hard to make, to be where we are. And it's also important for us to think about accessibility in yoga world, how some people don't have the means to be able to take yoga teacher training. So that's why I'm a huge fan of teacher training happening at community college, because it makes it accessible and more affordable for many students who may otherwise not be able to afford teacher training. Also thinking about teacher training programs, the location, is it an inclusive space? Is a facilitator, the main teacher, doing their best to make the space inclusive and welcoming to all people? I think that's an important part. And I think it's important to cover the scope of practice as a yoga teacher in the teacher training. As yoga teachers, we are not psychologists. We're not therapists. We're not physical therapists, occupational therapists. We're not dietitian or nutrition expert. We're not doctors, unless you have those degrees outside of yoga teacher training, which some people do. So really knowing what is the scope of your practice and refer out, or don't answer questions that it's not your role to answer if students ask you a question. I think these are important discussions to have. And also, you're not a dietitian. You're not going to tell students what to eat or what not to eat. Some teacher training, they talk about this is a diet for yogic path. If you are a yogi or yoga practitioner, you must have this type of diet. You can eat this, but you should not eat that. I don't know if I agree with that. I think everyone's body is different and everyone should have their own agency to choose to eat what they want. And as a yoga teacher or a teacher training program, we're not really equipped to make that kind of recommendations most of the time. Another thing I think it's important is there enough practice teaching hours in your teacher training? It is called teacher training for a reason. So you are in it to become a teacher, whether you choose to teach or not. So I think it's important to have enough practice teaching hours so you feel ready to teach when you graduate from your teacher training. I think it's also important to welcome different perspectives and views on yoga, life, philosophy, spirituality in your teacher training from students as well as from other teachers. When it becomes too single-minded and single-focused that this is the only way, it must be this way, this is the only path. And I think whenever anybody speaks in that way, I tend to kind of pause and question, because there are multiple paths and there's no one right way to do something or get somewhere, especially in yoga. Another important thing is, does a teacher training program offers safe space for students and maybe other teachers involved in the teacher training to express their questions, feedback, concerns? Or does students or teachers feel too afraid to or intimidated to express their concerns or feedback? I think it's important to ask for feedback and maybe collect surveys after each training or maybe midway the training. How is it going? Do you feel like you have enough support? How do you wish, this program, this format can improve for the next teacher training? I think it's so important to get feedback so that you can, as somebody who created this teacher training program, the person can always continue to evolve, improve their program to make it better. I think you can learn so much from getting feedback from participants, past participants, current participants, other teacher staff that was involved. I think getting feedback is important. So you can't listen to every single feedback. You can't make change every single time somebody give you a feedback. But if you start to notice there's a pattern to the feedback you're receiving as somebody who is in charge of the teacher training, maybe that's something worth listening to and think about. So I think those are my thoughts on teacher training. My ideal, perfect teacher training, if they're out there, and if I ever get to lead my own or lead with other teachers to, create a teacher training program. This is something I want to think about. And these are my values that I want to bring in to a teacher training program. So if you haven't taken a teacher training program, you resonated with anything I said today, I hope you take in an account when you are searching for teacher training programs. Also, if you have taken teacher training programs, I would love to hear from you. What did you love about your teacher training and what maybe you wish was different about your teacher training? Anything I said that you disagree with or you really agreed with, I would love to hear from you. I always love feedback. You can always leave me a review on this podcast. And you can find me on Instagram. My Instagram is at Reika Yoga. My website is www.reikayoga.com. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. And I hope you enjoyed this solo episode. I thought I'm not going to have enough thing to talk about, but as you can tell, I had more than enough thing to talk about. If you enjoy this solo episode format, let me know so I can do more of it. And next week, the regular programming will resume and there'll be another inspiring interview that you'll get to hear next week. So I hope you're having a great week so far, and I will speak to you all next week.